Thank you. Oh, Donald, you've walked away. Come back. Do I have another? Another one? You can have. Yeah, I've got shitloads. You can have them.
Mic check, even though I've been holding it for about 30 minutes. Hello, everyone. This is pretty self-explanatory. So I'm Chelsea Palmer. I am a co-founder.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I am a co-founder with Doge, or Alex down here, of Carpe Lunam Events. We are a nonprofit based here in Vancouver that does basically decentralization education. So I have a picture of myself here, and I have a weird agenda that I'm just going to run you through, because basically there's been a lot of deep diving on some great stuff in the history of ETC, current ETC dev. So I'm going to do a more philosophical and academic, like, big picture. So I'm going to touch on conceptions of capture that have been argued over on Twitter for quite some time. I'm going to use an example of the least contentious fork that has been seen in blockchains. Then the wild ride of Ethereum Classic's various trials and tribulations. Again, just kind of an overview. I love that we ended as we did, because what Donald just said, toxicity as a protective ecosystem immune system, is one of my slides here. And then I'm going to present some kind of subtle concepts on capture, because basically in contentious crypto economic setups, we're all constantly doubting others. We're looking adversarially, but we don't often turn that on ourselves. And so that's basically what I'm going to represent. And then I'm going to introduce the concept of conscientization as a model for thinking of that. So I have about 30 seconds of how great Donald's contributions to this ecosystem are, and like anyone who has, you know, like seriously, immune system present, because I do think that we need rabble rousers, especially when there are constant threats of really subtle capture. And I think all of the OGs that I have met from Ethereum Classic have similarly jumped in when it's necessary and be like, whoa, 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 what's going on here? So I have just kind of put up Vlad Zamfir's little point-by-point on, this is a very formal breakdown of different types of possible blockchain governance capture. And what I love is that at the time, you know, Donald had retweeted, and you can see that they're both able, and I'm kind of on Donald's side in this larger argument, we're all able to identify this framework that we agree on for what are the words about capture. And then we completely disagree on what that means in terms of immutability, in the case of like how Vlad has positioned himself on this and how Donald's responded to it. And I certainly, like, I've talked to Vlad directly about, like, I don't get how immutability doesn't solve, like, how immutability is the issue here on a technical level. Also, I failed to mention I'm going to upload a link list with all of the things that I've screenshotted, and there's a couple of like in-depth academic write-ups and stuff like that that are very useful. So essentially, who in the room feels like they have familiarity with the concept of capture, like a blockchain getting captured? Somewhat. So the idea is essentially that, you know, this beautiful, possible, utopian public utility we've designed will fall to the interests of a small select group. And as came up on the panel just now, the general conception about that, and I often fall to this too, so I really liked Anthony jumping in with that it's not always the money, but money, huge amounts of money in whales tend to control really small market cap ecosystems. So it is something that you know, usually we look towards like corporate capture and things like that, profit-driven capture. But I'm going to make an absurd hippie argument that it's ourselves constantly getting entrapped in our own biases that is the biggest threat to not building these systems right at this early stage. So Bitcoiners are very, very sensitive about the 2013 accidental hard fork. And when I brought it up to my favorite Bitcoiner, he's like, oh, everyone misunderstands that. I'm like, no, it's not contentious, and that is the point. And this author, Arvind Narayanan, I'm butchering that, but this awesome author, I stumbled across him because of this academic write-up he did. It's maybe a 20-minute read, and then found out he's like huge on Twitter, and I hadn't stumbled across his work before. But he points out how essentially, during like a core upgrade, basically the Bitcoin accidentally hard forked and a new chain was being mined. And in this article on Freedom to Tinker, Arvin's blog, he has even just screenshots of the IRC chat at the time, and just people had to coordinate, and they would have thought that it would make sense logically that getting all the miners to upgrade to this new upgrade that forked it would make the most sense. But then I don't remember if it was Luke Dash Jr. or someone, but someone someone was like, no, actually the most conservative thing right now, because people are just running miners they haven't, like it was 2013, people were just running mining and it wasn't worth much yet. So they're like, actually, those will continue running and really threaten us just having the chains go on forever. So we need to get people to downgrade back. And I think the fact that one of the mining pool leaders at the time who stood that mining pool would lose a lot by taking this action, he stepped up in the chat and he's like, yeah, we're behind this. And that helped with this sort of adversarial crypto economic thing of like, oh, this guy thinks this is important enough that he's willing to eat the cost. And this just isn't contentious at all. So there must be forms of forking and reverting immutability, et cetera, that aren't contentious and that can help kind of complexify the way we look at this. None of us are really fully there yet, including Bitcoin. I mean, like, and we've seen things like the Lightning channel bug recently where like Lightning just wasn't checking to make sure channels were valid when it was opening it. So I think one of my bigger points here is just for all of us to have humility as we're building this and see that it's really good for, I think the best cross-chain collaboration is when people jump into each other's repos with suggestions of like, oh shit, you know, when Vitalik is in EOS's repo, just like, this, you need to fix this immediately. Like, we're all gonna have to lend a hand to each other in that regard. So this is the Ethereum Classic Summit. So how does this relate to Ethereum Classic? I was bringing in it's been a wild ride for y'all, so I was bringing in the Bitcoin hard fork as a like, see, like I'm gonna pick on someone else, like in terms of any touching of our precious immutability. But I do very much love the code of principles and just all the documentation the community has produced. Like my values align more with ETC than with my fellow Bitcoiners because they seem really concerned about meat more than like philosophy a lot of the time. But so as again, I'll nod to Donald again, like this, we start to see the self-selection of values-based stuff in these arguments we have. Like if we can agree with Vlad Zamfir on what these different mechanisms of capture look like and disagree on whether we are experiencing capture in a given situation, then maybe it's good. Maybe our forks and our permutations, and I think someone's brought up spoons before in some regard, like maybe this is the natural evolution of our alliances and communities. And I think that's, you know, that perfectly supports all the points that have been made in favor of interoperability. I think that, yeah, this is the meme I'm proudest of. I had to use 2 different apps to create this. Yeah, like Ethereum Classic was born in rebellion against perceived capture of this weird socially designated fork. And since I know ETC Labs has a strong presence here, I won't go into the bits and bobs of the repository capture. I will say that when I was asked to write a year in review for CoinDesk last year, I devoted about 1/3 of it to this because I thought it was so completely nutso. And when I was making this presentation, I looked at like 10 open source etiquette guides to try to screenshot where it says not to cut people's access to a repo when you get access to it, and it doesn't say it in any of them because it's just so foundational. Like it's not even written down. So that's the thing, like open source has values, it has norms, they're very important. We never forget. And again, a couple people have really nailed this, so I will just reiterate Sorpaz's point that a 51% attack is a thing we don't want to happen. So how is it, like, there was one very recently, and we're all here thriving and having the ETC Summit. How has this continued? Why does this community not give up? World Star. Is it just the drama? I realize I have speaking notes, and I haven't been using them, so let me just Yeah, no, I pretty much covered that. So, I think it is our catitude. I think it is the very thing that makes us fight, that makes a scrappy, aggressive little community that's always like, you're capturing, no, you're capturing. I think that's very important at this stage, and I think it's very important in alignment with the values that this community professes to have. And I personally don't like how toxic Bitcoin is. Like, I'm currently in a library science program, and I do not feel comfortable inviting my peers in thus far with some of the, online stuff. But I do believe that in some ways, the aggression and the, what's this new project? What are you bringing in here? What's your intention? Like, that is really important for the sorts of immutable loyalists that have gathered together here. So my suggestion is that we are still at risk of forgetting that since, just because our protocols are super immutable and we're really agreeing on that, that doesn't mean any of the human decisions along the way, any of our community interactions are going to have any immutability involved in them. And they're going to have a huge amount of mistakes, in fact. And I wanted to, since Vlad had illustrated such perfect academic concepts for mainstream forms of capture, I've got a couple of absurd forms of capture. One is social capture of just charmingness, and that was what drove me away from Ethereum personally. I believe there's a lot of thought leaderness, the same way that kind of Justin conducts his Tron brigade, etc., of like, everybody pump this because this guy said it. And that has led to some convenient cyclical controversies. Like, I was blown away that the Prague proof of work thing blew up this year, because a year ago when I was in Ethereum professionally, the exact same argument was happening. So it becomes a bit Groundhog Day. And self-poning capture, which we are all constantly subject to. Our love and fondness for other people makes us want to defend them. Even my partner here and I, we are both super immutability enthusiasts. I can't promise that, if I found out he did something to screw over a blockchain community, I can't promise that I wouldn't be biased and try to help him cover that. Similarly, people we know, people we love, oh, I know you since old times, so I know you're not the guy everyone thinks you are. That's always going to flex our decision-making around things a bit. We're all subject to it. I do it constantly. And also, if you, like myself and Donald, if you are incendiary and a chicken little about these things, we will also be wrong sometimes when we call things out. So the main point here, sobbing mathematically, is that we are all subject to this potentially. And I'll close with this concept from Paulo Freire of conscientization, because I think it's useful. And I am an interdisciplinary troll, so I really like to go to places where they're fiscally libertarian and force leftists on them, and then I, force Mises on the hippies and stuff. So Paulo Freire was an amazing Brazilian organizer who created the pedagogy of the oppressed approach, which is basically getting groups of people who are having their land taken or something, getting them together and getting them to act out the possible solutions to their problems. And to Freire, this created a process of conscientization where you become aware of your position within the networks of power around you. So for people in the rainforest, they start to understand not just our land is under threat, but why it is, which companies, what are they trying to do to it. And for Freire, this concept of conscientization, it's and always becoming. You are always having to reflexively restart it. You think you know things. And I think this kind of mirrors our technical path with designing blockchain systems and Web3 and stuff like that. It's we're always going to be oh, wow, all of our presumptions up to this point are irrelevant because it actually plays out completely different in real markets. So conscientization, I always mess that up, and there's a Portuguese version of the word that I absolutely can't say, but conscientization is a continual self-reflexive process, and it goes against our deepest instincts to protect ourselves and our loved ones from potential threat. So we would be, the idea is we are the person in this meme, frick me, guy, no, nice try, frick you. But we have to sometimes, when we hear the frick me, especially when it's in collaboration around decentralized governance and stuff, be Did I deserve this frick me? Like maybe frick me slightly in this situation. So this is my nod to the beautiful Bob Somerville. I'm not often a softie, but I will be for you. None of us are beyond reproach. None of us are above mistakes, and that does create the reality where, if we all agree to that framework, none of us are unredeemable. Irredeemable? That's probably the right word. Yeah, you can take a picture of send it to my mom. She'll be really happy I was a softie. But I will end on a hard point, which is the enemies, the shared enemies, are those who want us to follow them without asking questions. And those who want, I think it comes back to is it people with money who have power? I assume in our ecosystem that it is the whales, because I learned so much after the fact of when the DAO hack happened, there was a lot of politics and insider stuff around the exchanges. I didn't know that at the time. So I just always assume that there are people potentially moving these small, tiny markets to meet their own needs, or to take our DPI, our decentralized pizza. So yeah. I will upload links to all the stuff that I put there to Twitter. And as mentioned earlier, DogeCon Vancouver happens every 2 years on the summer solstice. It will happen here next June. And we're going to have crazy stuff going down. So I hope you can all join us. ETC folk are always welcome. I don't know if there can be any questions, because that was all just my opinions. But we've got a minute, but we're also behind some. Yeah. Do you want mine? I didn't prepare for that.
Do you think decentralized pizza can be captured?
Well, it's interesting. It seems with the discourse today online on DPI, the powers that be were already trying to squash it. So it seems maybe they find it threatening, and I'd like to believe that will lead it to thrive more.
Yeah, they want to stop it, but it's an unstoppable pizzeria.
Well, places like Vancouver, as I've told you, places like Vancouver that have very bad pizza. The Pacific Northwest of this continent has very bad pizza. I am from the New York area, so I'm biased. We need DPI desperately, because they put ranch sauce on their microwaved bread here. Sorry, Vancouver, don't attack me.
But then if we were to restrict the Pacific Northwest from putting ranch dressing on pizza, are we not any better than CPI?
Oh, yeah, no, I didn't intend to restrict them from their pizza. I'm saying we need enclaves of real pizza to be able to thrive. Because I told you, Goldie's was New York-style pizza, and when I moved back to town, they were suspiciously gone.
Okay, so then the argument is that the decentralized pizza will remove the incumbent centralized pizza that people don't understand yet is bad.
I think some people who were born and raised here will still want their pizza that way. So they can have it. I'm a voluntarist when it comes to DPI.
Fair.
It was an appropriate memeing question round. So I see someone prepared for the stage. So I'm going to take my exit. Thank you.